We're going to go. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Garland County Library. I'm Debbie Tripp, and my co-chair is Summer Summers, and we are with the Garland County Master Gardeners. This is Know It to Grow It, and this morning we are so excited to have Kyle Manning with us. Kyle developed his passion for farming while attending Arkansas Tech University, where he majored in music ed and obtained a degree in Ozark Washita Studies with emphasis in sustainable agriculture. They didn't have majors like that when I was at school. After graduation, Kyle and his wife Becca moved to the Texas Hill Country, where Kyle was a percussion director in public schools. He also served as farm manager of a 20-acre farm, restaurant, and vineyard just outside Kerrville, Texas. They moved back to Hot Springs to start Fat Rabbit Farms. They sell their produce in 3 different farmers markets, in 2 local grocers, and several restaurants in Garland County. They also are involved with Farm Friday pickups. I'll let him tell you more about their operations and everything. But this morning, Kyle is going to talk to us about growing microgreens at home. So we're thrilled to have with us this morning Kyle Manning. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, so we're going to talk all about microgreens today. Thank you so much for the introduction, Debbie. A little bit more about what we do here now. I've met most of you, I believe. My wife is actually over at the farmer's market right now, holding fort down and selling produce for us. So we do a lot of other things in addition to microgreens. We have a 1-acre market garden on our 7-acre farm. So but the microgreens are amazing and they're awesome to do at home. And so very nutrient dense. So we're going to jump right into it. We're going to have time. I'll wait a little bit and we'll do a demonstration on the planting, and I can show you guys some reference for how to do that at home. We'll have a chance to talk about all these materials, and then at the end, for those that want to, welcome to come up, take a look at all this stuff, and ask all the questions. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what are microgreens? I think this is one of the biggest discrepancies that people will find when they're interested or looking into it. Can you guys hear me?
Not too well.
Do you guys want to come up to the front?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll try to speak louder, but as Debbie mentioned, I was a band director, so I'm used to being in front of about 300 kids. So I can definitely speak up, but I don't want to hurt anybody. Anyhow, so microgreens, the biggest difference between that and what some people call or are used to hearing sprouts is about how they're grown and what they're grown in. So the biggest difference is that sprouts are usually sprouted in water in darkness in order to not photosynthesize and bring in the chlorophyll and then fill up and turn green. So the big thing with microgreens is that they're typically grown in some type of medium, a soil, hydroponics. We'll talk about that a little bit further, maybe plastic mesh trays. But we grow microgreens, and a lot of that comes down to federal regulations when it comes to safety. Some of you might, has anyone ever sprouted seeds at home? Just for young? Yeah. Sprouts are wonderful. They're highly nutritious. Microgreens fall in that same category. We're just a couple days longer in the growth cycle than the sprouts. And again, they're sprouted in an actual media, and then they're exposed to some type of light or sun exposure, which is why they turn green. So anyhow, there's a lot of differences kind of in the nutrients, but they're still highly concentrated in their nutrient uptake. So yeah, so they're typically harvested at least about a ½ inch above that soil medium, and we eat them just past living. So that's the good thing about sprouts, is you're eating a living ingredient. Microgreens are harvested for us. If you buy our microgreens, they're usually harvested within 12 hours of that time you purchase. So eating them quicker, the quicker the better, and eating them fresh. We don't like to cook microgreens typically. So you can use them for different things, but they're better eaten, consumed fresh. So they're commonly used at home for nutrient intake and flavor enhancers. So they're delicious. We grow all of our varieties specifically for flavor and nutrient density. So there's tons of microgreens. We'll talk about what can be a microgreen. The other thing is they're commonly used by chefs. I think if you follow anything in the culinary cuisine, maybe in the last 30 years or 50 years, oftentimes you would see like a sprig of parsley on the side of your plate. And this is a much more elevated type of plating that they use. So all of the microgreens have different textures and flavor profiles, and obviously nutrient density. So chefs are really like using them for plating because they not only provide some color, but they provide a lot of flavor and things to help enhance dishes. So we actually sell microgreens to several restaurants. So I know we've probably got varying interested parties here. Is anybody interested in growing for a business? Mainly just at home? That's great. Yeah, so we'll focus on that today. But they are a pretty highly profitable crop for those interested in that. So why grow them? So microgreens are up to 40 times more nutrient dense than their fully grown counterpart. A recent study I was just reading too, just on broccoli specifically. So broccoli microgreens contain an antioxidant called sulforaphane. And in 1 ounce of broccoli microgreens, it has the same amount of concentration of sulforaphane as 5 pounds of broccoli. So when we're talking about that nutrient density, it's quite significant. During their life cycle, you know, and we'll talk about that a little bit, but all the nutrients are concentrated into the stems and the leaves. This is right before they would produce either a fruit or a crown or a root vegetable. So everything's in there before it would go to that fruiting stage or even its second set of leaves or third set. So it's very concentrated. A lot of people are they're hesitant on that, but the proof is there that the concentration is there. So they're packed full of vitamins, polyphenols, and micronutrients, which improve lipid profiles, blood pressure, insulin resistance, and systemic inflammation. There's actually a lot of definitely nutritionists, but even doctors that are suggesting microgreens as solution, based things to add into your diet because they can help with some of these things. So I've got a graphic in a little bit that'll kind of expose some of the specific nutrients that they provide. And so if you're looking for anything in particular, those can be ones to source out for what they provide for you. So they're known to help fight cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and have many other health benefits. And they can be grown in very small spaces. So this is what's an amazing aspect for home growers. I'll show you, you'll see a lot of references to my setup at my farm. It's just a 12 by 12 room. In that room, I can grow about 100 trays a week of this size tray. So this is a real small space at home. And we'll talk about all these materials in a little bit. You can use a windowsill. You can use a small little, corner of your living room. And you can grow a lot of very nutrient-dense food in a tiny space at home. So really, really good for home growers. They require very little inputs and maintenance. We'll talk further about it, but the life cycle is about 8 to 14 days total from seed to harvest. So you don't plant it and forget it, but you do have very minimal maintenance. So there's not, especially if you're in a controlled environment, like an indoor space, you're not worried about natural weather events and those kind of things. And they can be grown quickly, like I said. So most of them are ready to harvest within 2 weeks. So materials needed. All right, this is kind of a long list. I'll let you guys take a look at that for just a second. So like I mentioned, microgreens require some type of growing medium. So for us, we like to use a potting type soil. I made my own up until about a month ago. And that's the last, I've been growing these for about 5 years specifically. I've got a potting mix up here I'll reference today. I'll go ahead and plug in. Man of the Red Earth is a amazing company. Adam and his wife Jen, they are out in Mayflower and they make really high quality potting mixes and soil mixes. They also do worm castings, worm teas, and they have a retailer here in Hot Springs at Hot Springs Sod and Turf. And Adam is actually there today, just hanging out and talking to people and making deliveries. So I'll reference that a little bit more, but anyone who hasn't been to Hot Springs Sod and Turf, it's a good place to get some really high quality mix. It's an all natural potting mix. They have several different varieties. And again, I'll reference that a little bit further. But so materials needed, you need seeds. We'll talk about sourcing those in a bit. You need some type of growing medium. You need a seeder. I use this is an old garlic powder container. It works great. Depending on the seeds, still smells like garlic. But it's got, I've been using this thing for 2 years, I think. So anyhow, don't throw these out. It's perfect for your small brassicas and things like broccoli, kohlrabi, cauliflower, kale. I've got radish in here now that we'll use to plant later. You need a soil press. So I am a DIYer with most things I do. So I just made this little thing and it fits perfectly into my trays to press my soil. And that gives a good flat soil base and seed bed to then seed our sprouts on there, our seeds. Some type of scoop. I forgot my Folgers can that I use for everything around the house. So all my family that drinks Folgers brings me all their big cans. So those are actually perfect for these kind of things. Any kind of little like measuring cups and stuff, these are good to have on hand for this process. You need trays. So Microgreens growing trays. These are a shallow tray. This is by a company called Bootstrap Farmer. You can use all kinds of materials. The biggest thing you need is some type of slotted tray to allow the roots to penetrate into our water reservoir. So this is what a solid bottom watering tray. These fit perfectly together. This company, Bootstrap Farmer, is out of Paris, Texas. Really high quality trays. These are a hard pressed plastic that will last a lifetime. They're US made and they're about $6 a piece. I've got the cheapos too, which run you about $2 and they last about a season. So if you do gardening like I do, it's great to go ahead and invest in some of these. At home, you only need a couple. The great thing that you can do as well for home growers is Bootstrap has all different types of sizes of these. So they have little 4-inch containers that also have bottom water trays or 10-inch. So if you want just a couple different ones, you can get these in that size too. This is a standard size tray known as a 10-20, roughly 10 inches by 20 inches long. So those are great. A scale, I use a kitchen scale because you really need it to get down to grams. And this is really important. When we talk about seeding in a little bit, the density of your seeds is critical to a successful grow. Any of us, I know we've got some gardeners in here, if you haven't grown a lot, or even if you have, gardening can be very amazing, but it can also be really frustrating. And to eliminate some frustration, seeding density is one of the biggest problems people have starting out microgreens. So you want to have a scale to make sure you've got it really accurate. Some type of watering wand, mister, or spray bottle. This is great at home just for some light misting. We'll use this in a little bit. I have a mister head. These are wonderful to hook on a water hose. That's really nice to water your seeds at first, because if you have a real intense pressure, you're going to send your seeds flying out a little bit. So these are great. Let's see, 5-gallon bucket. I've got one of those lying around somewhere. That Tractor Supply up there. Those are just any kind of bucket for soaking seeds. A lot of our seeds need to be what's called pre-sprouted. So I'll talk further about that in a bit. Your peas, sunflowers, some of your other crops do better, like beets and cilantro. If you soak them in water for a period of time before seeding them, they have a much more successful germination rate. So just having some type of bucket. Shelves and racks. So I mentioned mine. If you didn't notice it already, the background photo is my setup at my farm. So these are just 8 feet long racks that I built with 4 shelves per rack. And each of those racks they're 6 feet tall. Each rack can hold 8 trays. So it's 32 trays per shelf unit there. So that's 64 trays there. You can scale that up or down. The black metal wire racks are wonderful for this. I like to save money when I can, but the metal racks are awesome because you can sanitize them. I've added those since I took this photo. I've got a couple more of those in there as well. So lights. This is another big one. Everyone thinks that you need some really high spectrum grow lights for this, and you don't. The lights that I have are a 5500 lumen LED shop light. You can get them at Lowe's. You can get them at Walmart. I got these on Amazon for about 15 bucks a piece. They're linkable, so I think they link up to 6 or 8 lights. They're really low energy usage. I run them 24/7. So they've been running for about a year now and going strong. So you don't need very fancy or expensive lights. If you're growing in a greenhouse type space, you don't need lights. You can use the natural light too, if you have something like that. Just depending on the season, you'll have to adjust what you're growing and things like that. When I'm growing indoors, I'm able to grow any crop variety all year round by using the light system. I do grow some in the greenhouse though during the spring. So scissors, we use scissors or a sharp knife for cutting. I have a fancy tool. I have a mini hedge trimmer that I use to cut these trays, and it's amazing. So I used to cut, one slice at a time. Now I zip through the whole thing and mow it down and start packing. It's pretty amazing. But unless you're doing it to scale, you don't have to do that. But, some type of humidity or temperature control if you're growing indoors. So if you're growing in a kitchen windowsill, this is already happening. If you're setting up a grow space, ideally you've got, you can do this in your garage, but obviously garages get really hot. So what I've done inside, this is actually inside of a metal building. So imagine it's a shop. I built an 8-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot room inside of that that's insulated, and I run a window unit inside of that. So this entire space is around 70 degrees, give or take, and ideally between 40 to 60% humidity, sometimes more. In the summer, it's hard to keep it there. It gets really hot, so which can cause a lot of problems in your grow. So you can start to have some mold and bacteria issues. So basically plants like it, like we do, around 70 degrees for most varieties, they're going to be really happy. When you start getting up 80 degrees plus, you start to have issues. So if you get really cold, it's not going to kill them, but the biggest thing you do is you start to slow the growth down. So anyhow, sometime in the winter, I run space heaters in this room. I don't have to run the AC. I just run a space heater every now and then. If you build it insulated pretty well, it'll maintain that temperature for the most part. So you've still got pretty low energy use. Fans, really important. We need circulation and ventilation on these things. We'll talk further in a bit, but you can see this tray. This is a tray of sunflower, by the way. They're grown quite densely. That's a part of a successful grow, is that they help hold each other up. If I had these very, roughly scattered and sparse, they would fall over and they wouldn't hold up very well. And then I'd get problems. They'd be dirty. So in order for kind of a clean harvest and a good stand, is what we call it, we have a very specific ratio of seeds that we apply. So anyhow, if you don't have good airflow, though, these can start to collect mold in these pockets. So you need a really good airflow. And you can see, I can actually see light through these. That's kind of ideal. And I'll tell you guys those ratios exactly. But anyhow, really important to have some type of ventilation to help that air move through there. Colanders, I mentioned pre-soaking. This is where we also pre-sprout seeds. So specifically for the crops I grow, peas and sunflowers have kind of a 48-hour turnaround before you start seeding to putting them in the tray. So what we do with those crops is they need to be soaked in water first. That helps the seed start to germinate. That helps the germ to come out of the shell. And then when we pre-sprout it, it's another part of that stage where I'll take it out of the water. I'll leave it in the colander for another day, 12 to 24 hours, and I'll mist those a couple times, and that just helps that first germ come out, and then we will seed it. And that just makes it a little bit more successful and quicker by the time we put it in our trays. So next thing is weights. During the process, you can see a good example. I'm going to hop up here. This right here, you can see it's kind of blurry. That's about 4 trays, actually 3 trays stacked with some weight on top. What we're doing in this process is the way we're doing this is we're simulating a seed going in the ground outside. What we do is we actually put the seeds on top. We don't cover most of them. We put the seeds on top. What we do is then we'll stack multiple trays on top of each other once they're sprouting. And that weight helps the roots penetrate down in the soil as if they're underground. They think they've got to establish that root system. So we're kind of tricking the seeds a little bit. So the roots go down, and then what will happen is they get so strong, they'll start to push up this top tray. So I do that about 3 trays high, and after a couple days, we'll uncover them, and you'll see little white sprouts everywhere. And after about 8 to 12 hours under lights, they turn green, and after a few days, they start to get taller. So anyhow, you need some type of weight. I've got a wooden block. Some things prefer a lighter weight when we stack them. So this is just a 2 by 12 I cut down to fit. It was a scrap. That's why the corner's cut off. That's not for a specific reason. Anyhow, and that weight is great for my sensitive brassicas like broccoli and kale, kohlrabi, those things, because if it's too heavy for them, they're not strong enough to push that weight up, and they'll die off and mold. But for the stronger stuff, like my sunflower seeds and my pea shoots, I made these, which is similar. I used my trays as a mold. This is just concrete that I poured in there, so it's got the exact form to fit in it. And believe it or not, if I wait too long, these sprouts will push this brick off. It's kind of amazing. This is about 15 pounds. 10 to 15 is kind of your max you want to go when you're doing those types, but you need some type of weight. Otherwise, if you're not putting that weight on top of them, because it's such a short window, the seeds are just going to grow on top of the soil, and they're not going to get a strong enough root to then absorb the water or to then grow and stand up. So that's just part of the growth cycle. It's really important. And then last thing on this for materials is additional deep trays for doming. And what I mean by that is for a blackout period. So with some of the crops, we like to have some additional days after they've sprouted where they're covered up. So after these sunflower and pea shoots have sprouted first, I'll cover them for another couple days after I've unstacked them. And what that does is it gets them leggy. And with some things, we don't want them to be leggy, like tomatoes and that kind of stuff. It can limit the fruiting process. But since we're not actually trying to harvest fruit here, we want them to get taller. So when they're covered in darkness, they're reaching for the sunlight. They're trying to sprout out of what would be soil. So by the time I uncover it, they're already a couple inches tall. It only takes another few days for them to fill up, when they are under the lights, to green up and get size, the proper size. Any questions on that before I move on? There's a lot of information. Well, I'll go back over it later. Yes.
I just had a question. When you were putting the weights on, was that when you initially put the seed in the tray, or was it after a few days?
It's initially seeding, and we'll go through that step by step in a minute. But yeah, it's on the initial seeding. That's when you stack them on top of each other and add the weight. So what type of plants and seeds produce microgreens? So really, any plant can be a microgreen. Most of the seeds that I grow for microgreens, the same variety is what I would use in the garden to grow the full level of that crop. Yeah, these are my chickens enjoying some microgreens and some other scraps. I feed all of the chickens the leftover trays, and I also grow some microgreens just for them. So they always get a fresh round of microgreens every day. They love them. Yes.
Yeah, you ever grow Malabar spinach, which is a hot weather spinach? We really do well with that in the hot weather.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I grew that down in Texas, and it loved it. It grew like a weed.
Yeah, they grow all over.
Yeah, they're vine all over. They're beautiful. Yeah, that pink vine on them. Yeah, they're really gorgeous. Yeah, so I do suggest sticking with common varieties at first. So if you want to grow some really abstract crop, I don't recommend it in the front end. It's really tricky with some of these. So the ones I referenced today, when I mentioned in the top 5 easy crops to grow, these are all the ones that are my bread and butter. It's the ones I grow. They also happen to be some of the most nutrient dense. So some of the more tricky ones end up being herbs, things like beets. A lot of those need specific types of germination processes. Then in the microgreen system, especially on the front end, are not necessarily worth getting into. If you really get into it and want to dabble in some of the more difficult varieties, I can help you out. So food safety. Sorry, I skipped one. Purchase seeds specifically labeled for microgreens production. There are some things I urge people to be careful, like solanaceous crops. So your tomatoes, peppers, potatoes. Those plants can be poisonous and toxic, so they're not things we want to eat, nor are animals. So I don't feed those types of cuttings to my chickens and things like that. But you want to make sure you're growing stuff, especially on the front end before you really get into it. Things labeled for microgreens, One, you're going to have more success. Like any selective breeding, microgreen seeds, in a lot of cases that are labeled for microgreens, are better fit to grow good sprouts. They're not necessarily going to be your best fruiting crop. So for instance, if I have a broccoli microgreen, it may not produce good crowns, but it's great for my sprouting broccoli, if that makes sense. So anyhow, it's like anything, if you get spring onions or bulbing onions, technically there's a lot to go into that, but get varieties specifically for it. Food safety, the other, I recommend going with an approved seed supplier. If you just get seeds from somebody, because this process is so short, there is a higher potential for contamination if you're eating seeds within 14 days. If you're buying some tomato seed from someone down the road, that tomato has so many days in the ground before you ever eat the fruit. So what can happen is, as far as cross-contamination, if those were grown in a manure base at a garden somewhere and that seed was saved, it could have contamination on it, or during the handling process. So I suggest really high quality seed sourcing. I recommend several later on. Johnny Selected Seeds is one of the main ones I use. They're an awesome organization. They're out of Maine, actually, but they do have varieties that are great, and all seeds for southern growers. And we have a representative. She lives up there, but she knows a lot about it. So if you have questions, but Johnny's is great. True Leaf is another great microgreen seeds supplier. So the ones we'll talk about today, some of the common microgreens varieties are broccoli, radish, pea, sunflower, kale, or any of your cruciferous or brassicas, and then herbs. So these are really your kind of big common ones you'll see. You also see things like amaranth. That's a really pretty one. All different types of varieties of these two. So there's tons of, I grow several different types of radish. I grow a purple, it's called a rainbow radish actually. And it's got a purple sprout. We do a red stem. We do speckled pea. We do tendril pea. So lots of interesting varieties even within these categories. So growing space, we talked a little bit about this. Can be grown indoors or outdoors. Obviously indoors is going to be more controlled. But this is a great time of year. If you've got even on your back porch, you could set these outside in the sun. I mentioned briefly that I leave my lights on 24 hours. There's a lot of different studies on that, but because of the short growth cycle, there's not a lot of difference in keeping them in full exposure or having a more normal life cycle like an 8-16 or 12 and 12, something close to that, where they're getting that dormancy period in the evening. So you can do both. It just kind of depends on your space at home. Can be grown in a greenhouse. Obviously, all these common places: their bedroom, basement, closet, grow tent. That's a really cool way you can get into this too if you've got a really small space. There's a North Spore, I think it's Vevor or Vever. There's a lot of grow tents online you can get. Typically, they're common for your like medical marijuana producers, but they're used for anything, mushroom growing. You can get these little 3x3 tents. North Spore sells one called a boom room, and they actually have, it's pretty inexpensive. It comes with a little humidifier and a humidistat. They're awesome spaces with a little shelf you can put microgreens on. So you can stick it in a corner, like I said, in your living room, or put it in a closet, any spare space. Again, need some temperature and environmental controls and some type of light exposure. So growing medium. We'll take just a sec to talk about this. So I mentioned Man of the Red Earth that I'm now switching to. I use predominantly, again, a potting mix. So that potting mix consists of primarily peat moss base. Peat is, if anyone familiar, has some sustainability issues with it long term. So there's, it's still very commonly used in the home garden and with commercial producers. But there's definitely some problems with availability and mainly extraction of that crop. So that's one of the big deals. So anyhow, peat's really common. I would love to switch to some other materials that I'll reference today, but I don't have a lot of experience growing with. So anyhow, there's tons of research out there further. Hopefully that can get you started. But I also recommend doing something, don't jump straight into the most kind of trendy type growing material. It's not going to be the most successful. There are ways to do it, but for a simple system, using a good organic potting mix is going to be really nice. So, and I didn't mention that, but I'll make a slight plug. My farm is certified naturally grown, so we are part of that. That's an actual separate certifying organization. It's a grassroots organization that's amazing, and they're not organic. And I won't talk about USDA organic, but just about CNG. It follows the same practices as your OMRI board and your NLP compliance. We're only allowed to use all of those products, but it really has a stronger base in natural growing. So growing biologically, building soil health, using only natural amendments and fertilizers. So we use no synthetics in any of our growing practices. So I won't reference those either. And for anyone who knows anything about hydroponics, I won't talk a lot about that today because in both organic and certified naturally grown, they cannot be certified. Hydroponics cannot be certified within those realms because the fertilizers have to be added to the water source. So it's not a natural kind of amendment. I'm not speaking poorly on hydroponics. They're amazing. They have a really neat place in the growing world, but they are not approved under these certifications, and those certifications were important for us. So if anyone has questions about CNG later, I can talk more about how we grow. But just so you know, when I reference everything we do, it's all natural based. So that's important to how we grow. So our growing, again, all natural amendments. So our growing medium we're now using Man of the Red Earth. They have multiple mixes. This is what they call their Green Thumb Nursery Mix. And I can talk specifics about it, but it has a series, it's a peat moss perlite base, and then it has a series of bacilluses, so some really nice bacteria to help feed the soil. This is a living soil. It's got crab meal, bone meal, blood meal, and I believe feather meal in there for a whole kind of spectrum of broad nutrients that are naturally absorbed. There's not a ton of nutrient density in here. The microgreens don't need a whole lot of nutrients because the growth cycle is so short here. But some fertility is important. Even past 7 days, if you don't have some fertility in your mix, you're going to start to see some discoloration and things like that. So crops dying off. That's my red stem radish there on the left and a handful of our mix there. This is actually a mix that I made myself that I used to make, and it's a very similar mix. I learned how to make all my soil mix at my last farm, and so I did that for a long time. But it's a peat moss perlite compost mix that then I added my own worm castings to, which are also here. I didn't mention blood meal and bone meal. So that's how I've done all my potting up for the last 2 years, or really 5 years, from my old farm in Texas. And I just started switching to Man of the Red Earth products because they're just as good, if not way better, and I don't have to mix them myself. So saving me some time is a big deal. And if you don't know much about growing or mixing your own potting soil, there's a lot to it. You know, getting a successful plant, you don't want to try to do that on your own and grow your own seeds for the first time, because you're probably going to have some mistakes in there. So anyhow, they're actually, as I mentioned, they're over at Hot Springs Side and Turf. You want to go get some? They've got some good stuff there. So potting soil, garden soil. Some of the other popular ones are growing mediums, are hemp grow mats and plastic mesh mats. Some of these are reusable. The biggest thing you need for the microgreens is really some type of moisture retention that can also wick moisture. Because if you have any seed sitting in moisture without the ability to wick it away, it's going to start to mold and rot. So what this does, our bottom water tray system, allows that water to go on top and then get down to the bottom. But I'll show you how we bottom water here in a little bit. But these systems are similar, but they don't contain a kind of single-use mix, if you want to say that, a potting mix. So they're soilless, which can be really nice when it comes to contamination. You've got a really clean product. But if you're not adding some type of fertilizer to that, you start to have issues because it needs some more to it. So water hydroponics, as I mentioned, rock wool is commonly used in hydroponics, but it's not approved for certification in the CNG or organic, so we don't use that. But it can be done in a very small scale at home too. Cocoa core, coconut core, peat moss as we use, and then soil. As I said, the limited nutrient need due to short growth period. So some people will sprout peas and sunflowers just in a tray with some water in it, and you can get some growth. For us, it's nice to have the mix to know I'm going to have enough nutrients to get me where I need to. I can also let these sit a few extra days if I need to. Maybe I don't need to, get rid of all these microgreens yet. I've got too many. I've got some more time because I've got nutrients in that mix for those to sit and survive and be happy. If you are really trying to harvest at home without nutrients and you're just using water and these mats, they might die off on you a little quicker. So you just got to watch it. So there's some timing there. So crop variety could determine the growing medium. As I mentioned earlier, things like beets, they like to be buried in soil. So if you don't cover them, their germination is spotty, and then sprouting is different, and so they have a lot of issues. So you have to use soil with those, where some other ones, like I mentioned, peas, don't always require a soil mix. Watering, so they all require different watering at different stages. So for the biggest part, and again, we're going to go through a step-by-step in a moment, they are initially watered on top of the seeds, but after that process, after the initial watering, they're all bottom watered. And that's important to keep moisture off of all the greens because they're so tightly planted. If these were saturated every day, you could do it, and some people will spray them, but it has a much higher potential for mold, bacteria, and fungus and things to build up. So we like to bottom water. So again, they're seeded in here. This bottom tray acts as that water reservoir, and then what I do is just literally lift, and I put about a quart or 32 ounces of water every day, and I just monitor that appropriately. If you lift it up once a day, if it's holding water and there's still water in there, it's not absorbing it, you need to cut back on your watering. It's just one of those things to kind of monitor, but anywhere between 16 to 32 ounces a day. So ensure a high quality water source. So especially with the microgreens, because we're eating this so young, at our farm, we actually irrigate out of our creek, but in the microgreens, I'm using a municipal water source. It doesn't take a whole lot of water. That water has been treated. If you want to run that through a secondary filter to get certain things like chlorine or fluoride out, you obviously can do that. But it's important for us, for the scale that we're selling, to have clean water, because any type of bacteria or thing making it into this would then be consumed within that same thing. So anyhow, there's a filtration that happens by using soil medium. That's another reason to have that soil medium there, because we're bottom watering. Pre-soak, pre-sprout, again, that's a list of some of those seeds that need them. That's also really good. The peas and sunflowers also have higher potential levels of contamination, and by pre-soaking them and pre-sprouting them, you're kind of helping to cleanse those seeds as well. So another reason to do it. Again, they're misted and top watered heavily on initial planting day, and then they're bottom watered every day throughout. And then just make sure there's no standing water. So sourcing seeds, I talked about this. If you've got, again, if you might already have some broccoli seeds or cauliflower or kale or radish, those are wonderful to start with if you have them. If you're interested in buying seeds, Johnny's, True Leaf, High Mowing, they're great companies that work where they're a really good middle ground for growers, because they can sell to backyard gardeners too. So you can get packets as small as a $6 seed packet, or you can get up to 100 pounds at a time or 1,000 pounds at a time. So they're really great, but they're high quality seeds, and they really like to kind of work with market gardeners. We're talking about couple acre farmers to backyard gardeners. So Johnny's is my preferred. True Leaf is great for microgreens though. I usually go on, they all have non-GMO heirloom organic varieties. That's important to us. So I only select those varieties, and I usually just will kind of price check both of them, for us. And sometimes it's unbelievably different. I just got my sunflower for about $100 cheaper from True Leaf than I did from Johnny's. Why? I don't. Maybe they were sitting on some stock. But anyhow, it's good to price check a lot of different sources. I talked about all the varieties that can be grown. Avoid nightshades in this process, because you don't want to eat. We're eating the sprouts, the greens, so we don't want to eat those leaves. Lots of other seed companies. You've probably seen, if you've heard a lot about microgreens, there's been a big push of like survival kits out there being pushed as a kind of a survivor food, because the nutrient density is so high. There's people online selling kits of sprouts and those kind of things. I've heard more of this than I have referenced it, but there's a lot of different sources out there. So just be wary, do your research. I'll leave my info for anybody who's has questions. But I would start with one of these recommended sources. So we're going to go through a step-by-step here, and I don't know if you guys can. I want you to be able to see this and see my materials. So can y'all see the table? Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. We can leave it off there, Summer, if you want. Yeah. Unless people can't see with the printer on. So I brought this tray, as I mentioned. This is my sunflower. It's got a slightly different process that I've mentioned, but it's all very similar. So the weight's different. The germination time and the time in the trays is a little different, but this is kind of what a fully grown tray looks like. So we would then harvest from this tray. If you're at home, the great thing is, let's say you're growing in a full-size tray like this, you could cut off a handful. I like to say, because of the nutrient density, that about a handful, a quarter cup or so is really a good serving size. That being said, I eat a lot of them. I have customers that eat clamshell a day, which are, about this big here. So they can, they'll eat one of those in a meal or something. But it's kind of like multivitamins. I like to say, our bodies can only process so much. And so these are amazing. But if you're eating half a tray of these at once, you're going to consume it and fill up your belly, but you're not necessarily going to get all the nutrients. So they're really better utilized as kind of like a multivitamin kind of thing. But they're great for added crunch. Anywhere you would use lettuce, I put them on tacos and burgers and sandwiches and salads, and we'll talk all about that in a little bit too. But anyhow, that's a fully grown tray. So that's there for reference. But yeah, you could just cut off a little bit and then let it keep growing and eat on that whole tray for a week or more, which is pretty awesome. So going through step by step. All right, so the seeding density for most of your varieties, the seeds for your larger crops, your legumes are going to be, or any of your other seeds are going to be larger densities. So I'll talk about those separately. But for any of your radish, broccoli, kale, those are some of the really popular ones. So we're going to reference those today. You need about 1 ounce of seed. It actually comes out closer to 20 grams. So I like to use a gram scale. I think there's 27 grams per ounce. So that difference can be the difference between a successful sprouting or an unsuccessful sprouting. So I like to say you want to start with right at about 20 grams per those crops. Now, the radish is a little different. It's on the high side of that. We need about 45 grams. So I like to start, we're going to use my seeder here, I'll show you, but I'll use a scale. And what we do here, let me clear this out. Let me make a mess. What I typically do is go straight from my bag here. I've got my scale set to grams and just kind of zero it out. We're going to try to get up to, there we go, right at 45. Perfect. Let's transfer these guys over. So the important part of this too is obviously depending on the type of tray or growing, space you're using, it's going to be more or less of this. All right. So the other big factor of seeding is just using or trying to do a solid seed bed across the seed bed. So I'm going to make my soil in just a minute. I'll put that in there. But you basically want there to be a seeds, an even mat of seeds across the entire tray, without them being on top of each other. That's the goal. You don't want a lot of space. You don't want big gaps. In order to get this type of stand, you pretty much want a seed to fill up every space of that tray. And that's going to give you a good stand. So we'll go over here. So you need a tray that drains, as I said, and you need a solid bottom. So that's what we have. Start off with them stacked just like this. And I don't have my Folger scoop, but I'm going to use my little cup here. So my Folger scoop that I use is I think it's about a 1 gallon. It's one of the large Folgers cans. So what we need here, and I use about 3/4 of it. So we're talking about, what is that? Right at about 96 ounces or so. This isn't rocket science. The big thing is you want a kind of an even spread of your soil mix here. So I'm just going to eyeball it, and I'll show you what that looks like once we've got it. Try not to make too much of a mess here. We're not in the greenhouse space. See how we're doing. So this, ideally, you want to get out any clumps or mulch. If there's any mulch in your mix, you want it to be pretty clean. So what I like to do is just give it a smooth. Start it out here. I'm just going to smooth it out. This is going to be perfect. Get that leveled off. Need some background music there. So then we're going to take our tamp and we're going to press it. All right. So this is just, again, my little soil press. And the big reason for this, like I said, is just to get a nice kind of flat surface. Because we're gonna, and I'm only gonna do 1 tray today. Normally I would do a couple. If you're only doing 1 tray at home, like I mentioned, the weights, I would normally stack 3 trays high. And that's gonna be part of my weight. And then I will put a brick or block of wood on top of that. If you're doing it at home, you just need to have some type of weight on top of it alone. So if you're only doing 1 little flat of broccoli, then you need a weight and something to press it on. I also brought this just to show you the difference and how easy it is to sprout in a small space. So this is one of my clamshells. We sell our microgreens in this. These are real simple. This, what I do is cut it in half. This acts as my, sorry, I got this split. This will act as my little reservoir, and this will be where I put my mix in. So we'll just seed that backwards. And I cut this one backwards, but that's okay. And I actually made a little tamp for these. I used to sell them like this at home, and I made a little press just like this. I pressed these little guys, and I'd sell them just as living trays. but essentially it's the same process. So you need, this is just an example. For instance, if you wanted to do one at home, just a little, 4x4, 5x5 here, press it down really good. You can use your hand. You don't have to make all these changes. But when you stack it, the big thing is we want that pressure to be in contact with all the seeds. If some of them are in a little pocket in a hole, then that germination won't sprout as well. So that's where the tamp comes into play, is having an even surface. Anything that's any kind of tray or cup or something, you can use solo cups or hard plastic or whatever. Like I said, it's pretty inexpensive to get into these trays if you're interested in growing. But, so next thing we do, we filled up the media. We're going to mist it. I would do a pretty heavy misting at the farm here, or if I was back at the farm, I'm just going to give it a couple spritz here for demonstration. But I would saturate this pretty good. Because this is mainly a peat moss base, it's going to hold, I think, up to 20 times its weight by volume. So it's going to be really good. It can really hold some water in there. And then, like I said, I've got that bottom reservoir for any excess water. It's going to drain off pretty well. I'll do this with the bottom tray on. If you're worried about overwatering, you could always start with the slotted open in a greenhouse space. Water it real heavy. If you water too much, it'll drain off. Then when that stops, you can put it back in. But I like to get the soil nice and wet because we're going to stack it here in a minute. And that germination process, it takes up to between 2 to 5 days. So this is the only time it's going to have contact with moisture. So if you underwater at this stage, you might have a poor germination. If you know much about sprouting a seed, most seeds really only need water to germinate. So you can sprout this way. You can sprout seeds, test old seeds by taking a paper towel, put them in wet paper towel and let them sprout on the counter for a day, and you can know if you've got good seeds. But after that, they need somehow to hold that water, and that's where the peat comes in. You like the water pretty heavy. Like I said, I'll take this tray back to the farm, and if you get microgreens from us next week, it'll come from this tray. So we've pressed and compact, we've moistened the soil, and now we're going to broadcast the seed evenly. So for my radish or the larger ones, this is a little bit more of a touchy-feely kind of technique. It's nothing fancy. When I use there's all kinds of spice containers. These have bigger holes. I just find this with the open face, kind of tapping the container along, works for me. I do always tell people during this process, I mentioned being a band director. I was a percussionist. So this is everything I do on the farm is really a rhythmic thing. So I can't help it. I'm counting my steps all day, and when I'm moving, I'm 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just always going. So this ends up being a percussive experience for me. But if you like shaking it, that works well too. Like I said, the biggest thing you want here is kind of an even broadcast. So you're just trying to fill in all these open voids. And I will say some of these seeds can take a little bit more space between each other than I said. So I said about a seed space. Some of them might need, 1 or 2 times their width or so, and that'll work really well. I'll tell you the ratios I tell you today are tried and true. As I said, I've been doing these for about 5 years. You can always go up a little bit or down a little bit, but if you do too much of that, like I said, you could be hurting your stand. So this is, I don't want to tilt it because it's not sprayed in yet, but I'm going to go ahead and moisten this a little bit. And so that's really it. At this point, we're going to moisten everything, just making sure I'm following my instructions. And then from there, and I'll give it a bigger one, we would cover with additional trays up to 3 high and add weight up to 15 pounds. So the radish is another one that's pretty strong. It can take a lot of weight, but that just helps give us a really good solid base and root base, and then that stem is really, really solid. Leave covered for 2 to 5 days. As I said, some require longer. I'll go over some of those in a moment. And then you unstack and dome or blackout for an additional 24 to 72. I do not do the doming period with most of them. So I only do that with the radish and the pea, helps them get a little taller. Or sorry, I'm so sorry. The sunflower and the pea, the radish, broccoli, all those things, I don't really do that doming process. I'm just doing this part, stacking. After a couple days, I'll lift up the brick and I'll see some sprouts coming, and then I know it's time to uncover those. So uncover and expose to lights or sun, and they're allowed to reach maturity. So if you know much about the life cycle of plants, the first set of leaves is not its true leaves. So that's true leaves is actually the second set of leaves. For resale, that is a safer baseline for knowing that that crop has hit kind of a safe stage for us to get away from that soil mix. Because of our harvesting and the way crops work, not everything's the same. For instance, our pea tendrils, they've got sprouts everywhere, so by the time they're at a couple of days old, they've already got shoots all over the place. So we try to let most of ours hit true leaf stage. Even these sunflower have the first emergence of true leaves. They're really small, but the true leaves, which again is the second set of leaves, is already out. And that's kind of when you want to get them. Because of the life cycle and what we're trying to get from these nutrients, for the most part, we want them at that young stage. If you get them too long, it's not unhealthy. It's just going to have a lower concentration of those nutritional properties. So, like I said, we like to cut just above the soil media. I'll cut about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch just to make sure we don't get any of that soil in there. And then a lot of our crops, not all of them, but we'll wash them and kind of sanitize them. So some of them, I like to tell people just to wash at home, because like broccoli and things that are really delicate, if you wash it and then I package it and we go to put it on a shelf, its shelf life is going to be a lot lower. Most of these, when harvested, will last up to 2 weeks in your refrigerator. Some people will tell me they forgot about them, they were 3 weeks ago, and they're still good. And that really can happen. We're so used to getting greens from the grocery store that were shipped from 1,500 miles away. By the time they make it to the grocery store and then into our plates, you might have a day or two left, and then they start to wilt, and they're a disgusting mess. So people buy our salad mix and our microgreens all the time, and they're like, I can't believe it's still good. I've had it for 2 weeks. It's because it came out of the ground within 12 hours usually of you purchasing it. So we harvest everything and then immediately pack it into the cooler. If it's processed, it gets washed first, then goes into our walk-in cooler. So it stays fresh, and then it hits your table so much sooner. There's so many other benefits to that, not only shelf life, flavor profile, nutrient density. So from the time a crop is harvested, it begins losing its nutrients and losing its flavor. So that's where microgreens come into play. If you're growing them at home, you're cutting out another middleman, which I'm happy to grow microgreens for you. But it's an awesome thing to start with. It's fun for kids. It's really healthy for you. So it's just neat to see. I never get tired of seeing that growth cycle happen so quickly. From the time I plant something, a couple days later, I've got a sprout, and within a week, I'm eating that vegetable. I'm eating that crop. So it's a really exciting thing to grow. So I mentioned the top 5 most nutritious and easiest to grow. So again, that's how we grow radish. That's the main one I'm going to demonstrate today. Pea and sunflower for reference, and I'll give you guys my email today. You can sign up if you're interested, and I can give you all of this information. You're also welcome to come out to our farm. Our farm is local. We're in Hot Springs. We're about 18 minutes from here, exactly. So we're on Mill Creek Road. So I'm trying to do more education as well, but we'll host similar classes at the farm. But if there's anything you missed today or have follow-up questions, I'll be able to answer all of them. But for peas, I usually do, I reference the dry seed, not the wet seed, because we'll pre-sprout them first. Or pre-soak them. So peas are about 9 ounces. Like I said, it's a much larger crop. So for this size tray, we do 9 ounces. Sunflower is about 5 ounces. But the good thing is your broccoli, kale, cabbage, kohlrabi, those all are right at 1 ounce or around 20 grams. Okay, so those are all the same. And again, those numbers are referenced for a tray this size. If you get a smaller tray, you just need to follow more of those principles. I'll let y'all come see this in a minute. Just having a good even seed bed without a lot of gaps, or cut down from those ratios. So if you're doing a 10-inch tray by 10 inch, you need 10 grams, all right? Vice versa. So you can go up or down based on your size. Yeah, go forward a little bit. So these are some of the benefits. I don't want to read all of these. I want to give you guys a minute to take a look. These are kind of why we grow the ones we do. We did not invent the wheel. This has been around for a long time. So, I copied somebody who copied somebody. But there's a lot of great information out there. But these are just really, really wonderful, highly nutritious, great flavor. And they're really popular with our people. So, yeah, you guys go ahead. And go to the next slide, but I can go back to these for anyone who's interested. So how to use them. So this is one of the biggest things people come up and say to me all the time. It's like, well, that's cool, but what do I do with them? If you've ever eaten salad, that's the easiest go-to. It's really, and I tell people there are multiple ways. So you can mix these in salad. I will reference, we do sell our microgreens to several restaurants in town. So we sell to 501 Prime and Vault. We've worked with several other chefs as well. We sell to Splash Pine Bar and some other kind of pop-up and caterings, and obviously a lot of people in town. But for instance, Vault right now is referencing, or they're doing a microgreen salad with every steak they serve. So they have a little mixed micro salad. They get a mix from us every week, a couple pounds a week, and that's getting tossed in a little dressing and served as a side salad. Really, really nice. Again, so nutritious, really bright, tons of flavor. They're great accompaniments for anything. But I do usually reference for people to mix them in your salads. So especially when you're getting fresh salad mix, it's great to add these in. One for other flavors and other nutrients. But as I mentioned, if you make just a big microgreen salad and you eat all that, it's wonderful. But you're getting so many nutrients, and that can also, that can have an effect on your digestion and all kinds of things. So I've had some customers that have had, some things come up and they realize, oh, it's because I was eating 5 clamshells a week and, I needed 2. And so anyhow, there's wonderful things. Nothing is going to hurt you really, but just monitor your diet. If you have a doctor and you're curious, you can ask things. But anyhow, let's see. Yeah, I did mention their best consumed raw. I do have a neat reference. We've been interested in getting into this. So we had one of our farmers market colleagues at the village that dehydrated some of our radish microgreens. So this, if you can tell, is about probably 1.5 tablespoons, maybe 2 tablespoons, and that was a full clamshell of radish microgreens. So that's kind of what they dehydrate down to. But there is some research to support an even higher concentration of nutrients when they've been processed that way. So this is, I don't have all the stats on that, but it's a great way to utilize, at the very least, any microgreens that might be going bad at home, anything like that. You can dehydrate a lot of things. These can be used as is, thrown in smoothies, thrown into soups and salads and things like that. Or just used, again, one of our things is to make some spice mixes. So we're going to blend these up and then throw those in with some salt and some other spices and get kind of nutrients in there too. So really neat. I'll let you guys, we can pass it around in a bit and you can smell it. It's pretty pungent. It smells good. But, yeah, so blended smoothies, like I said, you can freeze microgreens. You're going to lose its fresh, flavor profiles if you do that. But again, we talk about that nutrient density. If you've heard any stats on the produce in the grocery stores, a lot of research says that the freshest produce in the grocery store is now in the freezer section because it was flash frozen at the farm and it's got the highest concentration of nutrients. It's not on the shelf stuff that was on a truck. And a lot of times artificially ripened on the way here, and then makes it to the car.
I want to know how much protein is in the nutrients. Do you know how much they are?
Really good question. I've got some stats, and I can send you some stuff. I don't have anything off the top of my head on the exact ones, but I will tell you, like your peas are one of the high protein ones. Your sunflower too. You think about that's a black oil sunflower, which is going to produce sunflower seeds, which are great protein. And the legumes as well have high protein. So I don't have exact numbers, but it's a concentrated amount, and that's one of the ones I push for those. We can go back to that sheet, but I'll get some specifics for you. Let's see. Yeah, dehydrate. Oh yeah, and they're again great to share with community, friends, and family. They're awesome. If you're growing a lot, it's a really good crop to share and then sell, like we do. So. There are lots of other growing guides. So Bootstrap Farmer has I've referenced them a lot. They have a great growing guide online. It's all free. There's a lot of paid materials and things out there, but Bootstrap has a kind of breakdown of all the things we went over today. They'll tell you exactly how long it needs to be sprouted, all the seeding, and they've got that in a nice chart. I can send that reference to you too if you're interested or don't want to navigate. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Microgreens Growing, I believe, and it's on their website, free and available. So, do you have a question? Oh, good, sorry. Some other people, there's a lot of stuff online that I think you can get bogged down with, YouTube and those kind of things. A lot of cool information, but if you don't have that hands-on kind of experience to see these things or those references, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I had a lot of trouble trialing these over the years, and most of it I taught myself. So kind of watching videos and experimenting, and so a lot of failed experiments to get here. But it really is, it can be very easy. The ones I referenced today, if you seed them, you know, you're going to have some type of crop. You can do better next time and that kind of thing, but it's easy to get started. I reference all these things. Again, Bootstrap Farmer's great. Johnny Selected Seeds, they also have trays and fans and grow lights and racks and stuff. A lot of it can be sourced locally. If you're on a budget like me, it's great to, you know, get creative and improvise. And if you're a gardener, I think we hoard a lot of things. And so you've got scrap material and you've got all kinds of things laying around that is wonderful to use. I don't recommend spending $5,000 and buying lights and racks, and you might hate growing microgreens. And, you know, so anyhow, it's really easy to get started. That's one of the best things is, you know, for probably less than $20, you could have a crop and be set up to grow for your family for a long time, you know. So yeah, I do a lot of sourcing. I'll, you know, get things online. I'll buy things locally. I'll get things on Facebook Market. So it's great to do that. We referenced some of this, but some quick kind of common mistakes. Over or under seeding. These can have the same problems. If you underseed, again, you're not going to have a lot of help with the stem, so they're going to fall over. And once that happens, it's hard to get that crop to come back. If it falls over, it's usually going to get some type of bacteria and fungus, and now it's kind of a wash. Same thing with overseeding. If you've got too many things, and I've done this many times, you've got seeds on top of each other, and they're competing. One, you're going to get bad germination, but you're also going to start to get mold and rot and fungus and all kinds of things. Low quality seeds, you might have poor germination. That's the other thing I didn't reference. Johnny's, on most of their seeds, True Leaf 2, they've got a near 100% germination rate. So about 95 to 98%. Some things are in the high 80s, but because of their high quality selection, you're paying a little bit more for a better seed, but you're going to have great germination, which is important. If you get some local seeds, and local is great too, but if you buy from a bad supplier, you might not have that. So anyhow, it's good to source high quality. Over, under watering, this is one of the biggies. Again, if they're sitting in water, you're going to have a lot of issues. So just monitor. You want that soil to be moist without having any standing water. And again, if you're using a bottom water system, which I recommend, if you go to water and there's still water under there, you need to wait. You know, sometimes it's check again in 8 hours. If it's nighttime, just check again in the morning. You know, I check mine multiple times a day, usually at home, just make sure you're not letting it go dry. But another thing I'll tell you, and any gardener knows, I know we got a lot in here. The first time I was working at a farm, I remember walking in the greenhouse, and it was a hot day, and all of our squash plants were laying over on the side. I was like, oh no, I killed everything. My boss said, just give them a drink and then come back. And an hour later, I think I saw the photo on my phone. They looked like they were happy as could be. So sometimes if they fall over and maybe you missed a couple hours, you go, oh no, I killed them. Just give them some water and come back and check on them. Probably be okay. You can't do that every day though, or they will die. So yeah, wait, blackout, doming, too much, too little. Both sides of this. If you leave them in that wait period for way too long, which sometimes I do, I try to label everything. I use masking tape. I would recommend that. It's a big problem when you have a lot of things going. But I recommend labeling, track it, set alarms, whatever you need to do to stay on top of it. But if you don't unstack them or water them, those are things that are going to give you some problems. And I want you to be successful. So if you fail, you're not going to want to do it again. So it's good to keep track of this. Humidity, like I said, in the summertime, depending on your grow space, if you're in a garage and it's real hot and you don't have an AC, you may be good in the spring and fall, but in the summer, you may start to have a lot of problems, or in the winter, you may have a lot of problems. So if you're just wanting to do it seasonally, that's fine. You can grow around this time of year, but when it gets real hot, you're going to start having issues, and that's a big problem, and that's why. Again, low quality growing medium. Sometimes, as I mentioned, if you don't have any nutrition in that growing medium, you might start to see your plants dying off, and you don't know why, or they may start to turn yellow, and typically that's a nutrient problem, if not a light exposure problem, which I mentioned a little bit further down. Again, the difficult crop varieties, temperature, and then conditioning or air circulation. So all those big points, like to make them several times. Those are kind of your critical elements. So, and I can send this PowerPoint to anybody who's interested as well. Yeah, if you guys are interested, available. If anyone has questions or follow-up, or you want help setting up your microgreens farm at home, give me a shout. And yeah, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
I just want to ask you on your sunflower seed tray, how old is it?
That sunflower tray is, I believe, 10 days old. Yeah, 10 days. So, a little bit on this process. Typically, from seed to harvest on the sunflower is like 10 to 12 days. I seed them, I soak them for 24 to 48 hours. Sometimes that's just, I get bogged down and I forgot I was soaking seeds, so they got an extra day. That can be okay, and sometimes it can be bad, because if they sit in that water too long, they might start to mold. But 24 hours, then I'll pre-sprout them. I'll put them in here and move them out to the greenhouse for a day. I'll usually still put a cover over them, because I don't really want light on them. I just want them to have some airflow and still be able to sprout without being in soil. And then I'll put them into their trays, stack them pretty high. They'll spend about 3 days in that stack period, and then about 5 to 7 exposed to the lights, and then you've got a crop. So, yeah, pretty neat. What else? Anybody else?
You have a few online questions.
Awesome.
Renee says, so much information. This is wonderful. I've been growing off and on for years. My only issue is white flies. I refuse to treat them, but use nets that help a bit. I like Todd's seed. They are organic. Do you use organic seeds?
I do use organic seeds, yeah. And we don't have, people often ask about pest problems because most of our crop is quick. We're growing inside. I don't have a lot of pest issues in there. It's only happened one time this winter because I brought a lot of transplants in and aphids went everywhere. And that was a big problem. And so I had aphids in my microgreens. Haven't had a white fly issue in the microgreen system. I'd be curious to know if Renee's growing inside or outside. Yeah, I do use organic seeds, and non-GMO, usually heirloom as well.
Taylor asked, where is a great source for bulk organic seeds and also soil? It's hard to get affordable yet great soil.
Yes, so soil is a tough one. And I mentioned for the longest time, was making my own soil mix, and we were buying the highest quality compost we could get on a large scale, which was American Composting out of North Little Rock. They have a really good green manure base. It's important not to get a municipal compost because they have human biosolids or biosludge. So we don't use that. That was working for us. We would buy peat moss local, we would buy compost by the truckload, and then we would mix our own. We also buy perlite for anyone. There's a perlite, Ambient Minerals. They may not want to be referencing this. They're in Benton, and they normally deal with large producers, but they are a perlite manufacturer. So they actually make the perlite there. You can buy it by the super sack, which is about 47 cubic feet, almost a cubic yard and a half. I've been using the same sack for a year, and I'm still like maybe halfway through it. So it's a lot. It's good to go in with somebody, but it's $200 flat for a super sack of perlite, which is really, really fair. I would recommend her check out Man of the Red Earth stuff. Bulk is difficult, but depending on the scale, she could definitely reach out to them. They have a lot of retailers across Central Arkansas as they're out of Mayflower. Otherwise, I would tell her to reach out to us. There are, I don't know their scale, but there's, or if they're local, but there's a conglomerate of some local farmers within the kind of Central Arkansas corridor from Searcy to Conway to Little Rock to Hot Springs that are trying to come together and buy some bulk orders on some of that stuff. So there's some action happening, but it's a challenge. That's why we source a lot of our stuff and make it on the farm. Again, Man of the Red Earth's good, depending on locale. They're kind of all over. Vermont Composting is an awesome source, but they're not local, so they're expensive. So it kind of answers that question, I guess.
And we have one more from Renee. What percentage of blood and bone meal do you use in your peat?
Good question. So we do about I'll tell you the ratio. Anyone who's a quick mathematician in here. I use about a cup per a large mix. So in a 15 gallons peat, to 2 gallons compost to 1 gallon perlite, I'm using about a cup of blood meal to that mix. So not a lot. I can't remember, I've got actually, real quick, I've got some poundage reference here that is, not that one. Where are we? Right here. What is it? Here we go. About, so 3 1/3 pound per 1,000 square feet. I use that ratio for my bed applications. When I'm making my beds are about 300 square feet. But yeah, about a cup per 15 gallons of peat. So down from there, I would say anywhere, maybe a 1/3 a cup for a 5 gallon mix then, of blood meal. And then the bone meal is about maybe a 1/2 cup. I think it's a slightly smaller. I don't need a lot of the phosphorus in there for that process, for the microgreens. Now for the seedlings, it's a little bit, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, I'd say about a 1/3 a cup per 5 gallons would be a good ratio there. Too much nitrogen obviously can be an issue, but the biological nitrogen is a little bit different uptake than, say, a synthetic that's going to be quickly available, So anything else online?
That's all for now.
Okay.
Yeah, those seeds that you, like the sunflowers that you pre-sow, is there a trick to getting even disbursement when you're comparing
It's a
it?
good question, yeah. So they're obviously a little different because I'm taking actually at that point a wet seed and then spreading that across the trays. And I didn't say that whole process. We could spend all day going through all this. But what I do when I pre-soak them, I weigh them out. I actually do a bulk. So when I plant sunflower, I plant 6 to 8 trays worth. So I soak them all in that tub. I still weigh them out. I actually have a cup. The more you do this, I have a little pint mason jar that I use, and 1 scoop of dry sunflower seeds is right at 5 ounces. So I do 1 scoop of those per every tray I want to plant. So if I'm doing 8 trays, I'm doing 8 scoops, and I don't even think about it. I put them in the 5 gallon bucket. I soak them, I sprout them, and then I just eyeball distribution. So they're coming from this. I'll lay out all of the trays. That is one trick I do. So if you pre-soaked or you've selected the amount of seed you want to plant for so-and-so tray, once I'm ready to actually seed that, I'll make all of my trays like I did this one. I'll make all 8 trays, and then I'll just kind of roughly scatter them. And the good thing about them, and I mentioned this, but just to clarify, we're not covering these with soil. So you're just evenly distributing them on top of the soil. That's for 2 reasons. One, we don't need to because we're not trying to bury them, but it keeps it really clean. So that's where the stacking comes into play when we have that kind of faux or fake, the facade we're putting on the plants to create that growing environment. But I'll just scatter them broadly, evenly for the most part, and then I'll just make sure if there's a little hole there, that one's got a little too much, I'll just fill it in. But if you wanted to get really down to it, so it's exact, after you soak them, you could then re-weigh them and distribute that out separately, and that would be a better way just to be exact. The more you do certain crops, for me, I do most of these varieties every week, a couple times a week, so I just kind of know what it looks like. But once they kind of drained off after you pre-soaked and then now sprouted, they're not like they're sopping wet, so they're easy to kind of spread out and then just lightly kind of move around with your hand and feel it out. What else? Anybody else? Any other questions about materials or anything like that? All right. Well, you're welcome to Yeah, and you're welcome to, after this, you're welcome to come up and chat after if you didn't want to say a question out loud and come talk to me in person.
Yes, and we'll do the door prizes. We have 2 $25 gift certificates, compliments of Garland Library and Kyle Fat Rabbit Farm, and therefore he's at Farmers Market every Saturday and online and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, you want to pull one and can you read it?
Yep.
The last 3 or 4 numbers probably.
Just this last 3 or 4. I'll read the whole thing. 366776.
There you go. Do one more.
One more. All right. Yeah, so just the last 3. 705. All right. Winner, winner.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Kyle, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Come forward and take a look.
Summer, Debbie, Master Gardeners, thank you guys, and the library, thank you guys for everyone for your help. Thanks for coming, you guys.
Okay.
Hold it.